Good morning. I want to thank everybody who joins us today. My name is Olga Atamanova, and Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform continues its operation. Today it's year 9 of the war and day 280 of the full-scale invasion of the Russian aggressor in our land, and I want to thank the representatives of all the mass media who tell the world the truth about this war. Our brief schedule for today is as follows. At 11:30 we will have Lyudmila Filipovich joining us. She's the religious scholar, Doctor of Philosophy, Institute of Philosophy of the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine, and we will talk about Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate as an instrument of Russian propaganda and levers of state influence. At 12 o'clock joining us will be online will be Vitaly Kim, military governor of Mykolaiv region, and we will be talking about the situation in Mykolaiv region. At 1 o'clock joining us online will be Anna Dorobyanka, executive director of European Business Association, and we will be talking about the business during the war, the challenges and issues our business is facing during the war. And at 4 o'clock we will have the presentation of the contemporary Ukrainian cartoons exhibition 100 Views of War, so bear with us. And joining us right now online is Pavlo Kyrylenko, the military governor of the Donetsk administration. Good morning, Mr. Pavlo. Good morning. Mr. Pavlo, we know that this day is no exclusion. All the Donetsk region is under constant shelling. What is the situation? What was it during the last day in general and right now? The situation remains generally tense in the Donetsk region. Last days, almost all the towns along the front line were suffering bombardments. The enemy does not leave its attempts of attacking our troops using the MLRS and S-300 SAM, shelling the towns even in the areas remote from the front line, from the forward edge of the battle area. I mean the city of Slavyansk, which was shelled by MLRS recently. In Kurakhova, the enemy does not only destroy the civil infrastructure but takes all the attempts to inflict maximum damage to critical infrastructure of the region. Along the forward edge of the battle area, the situation remains stable but tense. Our main areas are Bakhmut and Avdiivka districts. All the works of all the military administrations and emergency services, along with the local governments, remain stable. All the necessary help is being provided to the civil population. The office of the president directed the deployment of the resiliency points in the Donetsk region, but the works are still in progress. Was the situation with the shellings within the last days? And are there any casualties among the civil population? Yes, there were 3 casualties during the last day and 14 more injured. The strikes were inflicted on the deoccupied territories as well. Using the MLRS, the city of Liman was shelled yesterday, and generally almost every day we document casualties and injuries among the civil population, among the local population. And we post this information in the social media on our channels. I post the figures on a daily basis with relevant references, but they do not count the occupied territories, for example, of Mariupol, where we will be where we'll only be able to calculate the casualties after the deoccupation. But since the beginning of the full-scale invasion and the activization of the warfare in the Donetsk region, more than it's 1,235 people died due to enemy shellings. Mr. Pavlo, about the critical infrastructure, we understand that Bakhmut is currently almost completely destroyed, and we cannot talk probably about the functioning of the critical infrastructure, water supply and power supply. What are the other towns which are now left without any utilities? It's Marinka, Krasnogorivka, Novovasilievska, Vuhledar, and our heroic city of Avdiivka, Donetsk, Bakhmut, Siversk, and Soledar, the northeastern part of the region. It has the communities where, without exaggeration, there were huge attempts taken to resume the gas supply, but the resumption of power and water supply is virtually impossible in those places. The gas pipelines, they go along the front line, and they are impossible to be, they cannot be repaired, because as soon as enemy spots any movement on our side, they open fire and damage the pipelines. And when our teams do the repairs on the critical infrastructure, the enemy immediately opens fire on the repairing teams. And talking about the power infrastructure, in 11 communities we partially resumed gas supply, and in 9 of them we resumed the gas supply in full. 10 more communities are such where we still cannot resume any gas supply to the communities and district capitals due to the reasons I have already mentioned. Well, talking about the power supply, for example, in Avdiivka, Maevka and Krasnogorivka, and Bakhmut and Soledar and Siversk, the aerial power lines are destroyed to the extent where we can count them in kilometers. The struts are blown up by the enemy, and they're destroyed by their constant shellings, but still the government, even upon the evacuation and under the conditions as difficult as these, and where people still refuse to live due to the difficult condition, the government provides alternative sources of heating, I mean the stoves and ovens, and the communities receive subventions from the state budget, which were handed for procurement of wood and solid fuel for the communities. So people have those who decided to remain in their homes so they can get heat. And I always emphasize that it's very difficult and it's almost impossible to guarantee that people will be provided with heat and that they will have food, notwithstanding the fact that they are being delivered even along the front lines, but still we cannot guarantee 100% safety and security. This is why I can say that situation in Donetsk region, since Donetsk is one of the regions deterring the enemy, where the enemy forces concentrate a lot, the situation is still under control, and thanks to our heroic defenders, the enemy cannot move any further and develop success in this area. Regarding evacuation, you mentioned evacuation. Is the evacuation still in progress? Do people keep leaving? And if you have any figures, how many people already left since that moment when the decision was taken about the mandatory evacuation? The resolution on mandatory evacuation, since the moment it was documented, the main work done by the local administration and regional administration, and the main part of the people, the majority of the population, as of 24th of February, they were already evacuated. I'm talking about 3/4 of the population of the region. But there are factors which may influence on the number of people returning, and one of such factors is the resumption of gas supply in the areas remote from the forward edge of the battle area, the repairing of the power supply. I mean, the control of the operation of the functioning of the area, so to say. If I was talking about the 350,000 people as of the beginning of the mandatory evacuation, so now in the cities and towns remote from the forward edge, the population increases, and the population of the communities adjacent to the forward edge, we give them an option not only to evacuate, but starting from the establishing of evacuation routes and provision of safe shelters in the remote areas in the depth of Ukraine. We provide the option of relocation and accommodation in the depth of the region. So in summary, this mandatory evacuation process is going on, no matter the number of people. Their applications will be processed under proper procedure, and we evacuate people first of all from the places along the forward edge. But people have to have understanding where they evacuate and what will be the conditions, and the evacuation is in progress no matter how soon we resume the operation of the critical infrastructure along the front lines. We take care about the life and safety of the people. This is the main factor under this condition, but the resumptions of gas supply and power supply and bringing life back to the territories along the front lines is the main factor for the population of the Donetsk region to come back to their homes. But unfortunately, we cannot guarantee 100% safety and security for the population. Thank you, dear colleagues, your questions. Good morning, Irina Mamchur, Ukrinform. My question is about mandatory evacuation. Can you please tell us, it's been in place for 4 months already. Do you have any information about the number? Well, maybe not absolute figures, but are there categories, some vulnerable categories falling under mandatory evacuation? The population who still remains in those areas of Bakhmut, it's Solidar, for example, the children under 18 years, persons with limited mobility, and so on. Yes, talking about the children below 18 years, the statistics is fluctuating about their presence in that area. In general, in Donetsk region, about some dozens of thousands of children remain with their parents in Donetsk region. Many of them left from under the shellings. I mean, the communities which are under constant shelling, and the work is still in progress. It's been conducted permanently with the parents, but the law enforced does not allow us to forcibly evacuate them, because there's much difference between mandatory and forced evacuation. Evacuation is not something that cannot be done in a forcible manner to children, and there are some dozens of families which stay, for example, in Soledar and Siversk along the front lines. People move from private buildings, they move into the depth of the region, staying there, but still they refuse to evacuate outside the region. So talking about statistics, the number of children remaining in the region, it's pretty complicated, because children who were in communal institutions, community communal institutions, they were evacuated from foster houses, foster homes, or so such children, they were all relocated during the first month of war, where children reside in families. In their majority, they are either in the depth of the region, they left the areas adjacent to the front lines, and usually those who are staying in the territories along the front lines are most elderly, or those who refuse to live under any conditions. Mr. Pavlo, Kramatorsk and Slavyansk, the most densely populated areas of Donetsk region under Ukrainian government control, how much do they suffer from shellings? We understand that there's probably a lot of people staying there. This is why I told you about the people coming back to the region. Well, talking about the most active evacuation stage and the cities of Kramatorsk and Slavyansk, as of July this year, we reached our top goal when, for example, out of 204,000 people who have resided in Kramatorsk, we reached the figure of 45,000 people. In Slavyansk, they had a population a little bit above 100,000 people of permanent resident, or like 96,000 residents. The lowest number upon the most efficient stage of evacuation in July reached 18, maybe up to 20, well, a little bit below 20,000. As of now, when we were preparing to the heating season, we can show these cities as the example. The gas supply was resumed in the apartment blocks in Kramatorsk and Slavyansk, and the people started coming back. So, for example, now the population of Kramatorsk reaches almost 80,000 people, and in Slavyansk it's about 40,000 people. So we understand this large number of people coming back to these cities, and it means the life is coming back to these cities, and these places are the key cities, key targets for the enemy, key goals for the enemy, and these goals will not be reached. This nice Slavyansk found itself under fire from MLRS. The enemy cannot reach it with the cannon artillery, and in places where they cannot reach even with MLRS, they use the SAMs such as S-300, which is actually the air defense rocket, but they use it on the land targets, which is quite imprecise, and it emphasizes the cynicism of the enemy. They're showing that their target is the critical infrastructure, and these periodic shellings are being inflicted even on the mentioned cities, just as well as all over the territory of the region, so there is no safe shelter all over the place. I want to thank you for joining us, Mr. Pavlo, for describing these important events. Dear colleagues, I will remind you we had Pavlo Kyrylenko joining us, the military governor of Donetsk region. Our next briefing is at 11:30, and we will talk about the activities of Moscow Patriarchate in Ukraine. So bear with us.